Yeah, just bring me a pack of backwoods and a slush, right? Hey, my ring look like a snowball. Chopper, take your nose off. Hey, this is crippy, prawn and shot, no soy sauce. Hey, all I do is go hard, pull up in a sports car. This is Louis Vuitton, it's not no Goya. Go like Minnesota, I give it Coca-Cola. I fly your bitch out, she sent you a postcard. Huffy, 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 then I puffy. My bitch look like Buffy, and she ride me like a huffy. Wicked, wicked, be back in a jiffy. Wicked, wicked, tell her eat my Ricky. Don't get trippy, trigger finger itchy. Smoking piffy, this is sticky, icky. Winner, 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 chicken dinner. I pull up in that caddy with the spinner. Stop. Did she just roll up a swisher? Bitch, she did? Someone get this bitch out on my spinner. On my spinner. Man down. Right now. Right now. Cause wanna run up the buckles. Motherfuckers wanna run up the block. I just tell them niggas I been running the block. And my phantom way too big to fit in this parking spot. Hey, I guess I'm gonna have to buy the whole parking lot. Hey, yo, slush, drop the track. I'm about to get these niggas a heart attack. I'ma get that strap, then run them in the back to the bank till I want all of that. What you know about 50 cognac? Know a lot pack while we packed up in the Pontiac. Ain't matter of fact, white walls in the Cadillac. Drive by the laundry mat. Man down. Man down. Man down. Man down. Cause wanna run up the buckles.
Apparently the bot is working. All right. So, I think I got everything running. I'm just going to bring my music way down. I probably should go to my main screen. Actually, that's our main screen right now. I think. Let's view it. This is a good thing, depending on your. Yeah, and I'm on a studio view. We're good. So tonight, we're going to talk us some Bernie Sanders. Let me bring up. So, essentially, the reason I wanted to talk about Bernie Sanders tonight is because we just had a couple important, election time, like the Super Tuesday, and then they call it Mini Super Tuesday, the last two Tuesdays, and Bernie Sanders got kind of his ass kicked. Leto is in our chat on Twitch, so she's watching on Twitch. We got people all over the place because we're broadcasting on YouTube, Twitch, Periscope, Mixer, and Facebook. So you can see this everywhere. I don't know if you can chat everywhere, but so far we have chat coming up from YouTube and Twitch, so that's good. But tonight I have a guest with me. Her name is Rebecca Ney, and it's pretty interesting. Rebecca and I used to do. We both podcast, and she did a show called Tranny Rec, and I won't even mention the name of the show that I did. But so this is a reunion of sorts. Rebecca is the former host and producer of Tranny Rec Radio, and she currently self-identifies as a keyboard warrior on Facebook. So, are you there, Rebecca? I don't know.
I am, yes.
Nice. Very nice. So, tonight I wanted to talk about Bernie Sanders and his loss last week on Super Tuesday against Joe Biden. Joe Biden won Arkansas, Alabama, Maine, Minnesota, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia, while Sanders won Vermont, Colorado, California, and Utah. This past week's Tuesday contest, Biden won Michigan, Missouri, Washington, Idaho, and Mississippi, while Sanders picked up North Dakota. I wanted to be a complete asshole here and say, "I told you so." And I actually have some footage from the Bernie Sanders, or I actually have some audio that I got from the Bernie Sanders campaign, and I'm going to play that now.
We just got our ass totally kicked. We couldn't do diddly poo. We sucked. That was a disgraceful performance, in my opinion. We threw that game. We gave it away by doing that. We gave them the friggin' game. In my opinion, that sucked. Holy crap. I don't know who the hell we think we are when we do something like that. Unbelievable. It was a horseshit performance. Horseshit. That's pitiful. I mean, it's absolutely pitiful to perform like that. Pitiful. It sucked. It stunk.
So that pretty much encapsulates what my kind of feeling over Bernie's result. And on Twitter, I call myself Cassandra, off of Cassandra. Basically, Cassandra is a woman in Greek mythology cursed to utter true prophecies, but never to be believed in modern usage. Basically, it's someone whose accurate prophecies are not to be believed. In 20, I want to bring my browser window up here. Some random geek in the chat says, "Ah, yes, Jim Mora playoffs, yes." So this is a post that I did in May of 2016, before the election. By the way, it's the Tea Party, so I have to drink some tea. It's a requirement. Kind of a prop, but not. I've loved tea since I came over here. But I wrote this post essentially saying that Bernie had a pathway at the time. Zoom, I do not want a gift. At the time, he basically was getting, he's kind of in the same position he is now, behind. And I said that he does have a path. And basically that's the path that Obama went down to defeat Hillary Clinton. He chose not to, and we all know how that turned out. But after I posted that, and after, the 2016 election, I wrote another post basically where I talked about why. Because everybody was trying to blame Bernie, trying to blame the DNC, and I said, and I'm this list here. I basically said it wasn't one thing. It wasn't Bernie Sanders supporters. It wasn't Russian hackers. It was all these things. And I think that's been borne out in a lot of, each one of these things has a source that I link to. And, you can point to so many things. It wasn't all one thing that killed Hillary or Bernie, for that matter. It was a bunch of things. So with that in mind, fast forward to this election cycle. It seems like Bernie Sanders didn't learn a lot from 2020 or from 2016. And he's like an old time socialist. He has that kind of outlook. At heart, he is a class reductionist. I had some hope that wasn't the case. he posted this on his Twitter his Twitter account. I'm going to bring my music all the way down here.
I want to remind you of a very famous statement made by a man named Reverend Martin Niemöller. And Niemöller spent years in a Nazi concentration camp during World War II. And this is what he said, I quote, "First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." And what that means is that when they come for the immigrants, we all stand with the immigrants. And when they come for the Muslims, we all stand with the Muslims. And when they go after a woman's right to control her own body, we stand with the women. The time is long overdue for us to stand up and to tell this president and his Republican allies that we will no longer tolerate demagogic and frankly racist attacks against immigrants.
Now that sounds pretty intersectional, doesn't it? I thought it did. And that kind of had me excited about Bernie's campaign. But Bernie said in an interview in 2016, he said the working class of the country is being decimated, and that's why Donald Trump won. And what we need now are candidates who stand with those with working people who understand that real median family income has gone down. He said we need to go beyond identity politics. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to play a second clip. He was actually on the Deconstructed podcast with Mehdi Hassan. And this is what he said.
A lot of political debate is...
Oh, dear.
Do you accept that a lot of the poverty debate on the left has focused on class? And a lot of people say, well, race hasn't had the same look in when it comes to talking about poverty historically. A big study out this week found that black boys raised in America, even in the wealthiest families, the best neighborhoods, still earn less in adulthood than white boys with similar backgrounds. Race seems to trump class even now.
I wouldn't use it that it trumps. Both of them are enormously significant. And there is, I haven't read that whole study, but I read summaries of it. And that's just astounding. But I think, to my mind, what we are focusing on, whether you're black or white or Latino, is the fact that we have 40 million people living in poverty, some in desperate poverty, that we have an administration now that wants to make a bad situation even worse by cutting back very substantially on food stamps, on other nutrition programs, on affordable housing, etc.
A lot of political debate is...
So there, again, it goes back to this reductionist, it's all about class kind of thing. And, you know, I can't speak for the black community. Myself, but what I can say is that this is actually, when was this? This was March of 2017. Sanders defends Trump voters. I don't think they're racist, sexist, or homophobes. That's the thing. This has sticking power. People remember that, especially people that are over 50. They remember this shit. I don't really think that when it comes down to saying They're not racist. They're not sexist. They're not homophobes. There's plenty. I think there's plenty of black people that think that Bernie Sanders has a deaf ear when it comes to race, and this doesn't help that at all. So yeah, I mean, but as a trans person in the LGBT community, just some history. I did. I was part of the Obama campaign. They reached out to me when I was doing Trans Advocate. They pulled me in and said, you know, I kind of looked at his policies and I saw that he was the only one running except one other candidate that, and it didn't include Clinton, that had actually sponsored trans inclusive legislation. Barack Obama had back in Illinois when it wasn't politically savvy to do so, you know? And that impressed me. And I started looking at his policies, and they were very trans inclusive. So I joined the campaign, and I was effectively a surrogate. I was part of his LGBT policy and steering committee. And we did a lot of outreach into the community through blogs and videos and such. That was in 2008. I didn't see him. The people that were supportive of Bernie Sanders in the trans community that spoke for him were not an official part of the campaign in 2016, and I haven't to this day seen any trans or really LGBT official campaign spokespersons. And that's part of the game. That's part of how this is played. You go out to your surrogates and they go out into the community, they get support, and it's kind of like a spider web of this stuff floats down, but you have to reach out to these communities. Bernie hasn't done that. I want to show you something as well. This was from the Creating Change conference. There were two candidates that had this is the leading LGBT it's a conference for activists, leading activists in the community. He couldn't bother to send anybody. Only two campaigns did, Warren and Buttigieg. That's it. There were two human rights campaign events. Granted, he did have a heart attack during that time. I understand that. But this scheduling conflict for both events was before he had a heart attack. So it was planned that he would not attend these. But he did have time to go on the Joe Rogan show. He did have time to go on the Joe Rogan show and talk to an audience that A, isn't going to vote for him, and B, is kind of antithetical to his message, and C, people in the LGBT community, people in in minority communities watched that, saw that. And again, it's like a dog whistle. So, I'm just looking in the chat. We got a kind of lively chat over on YouTube. The 2020 Sanders campaign seems like it's more worried about outreach into the white dude bro community than it is to the minority communities, the LGBT community, the Latinx community, and that is a problem. Now, Rebecca, are you still with me?
Yeah, just give me 1 second.
That's all right. This is where I want to bring you in and have you talk about kind of your kind of Rebecca, by the way, is in remind me where you live now. Oh,
I am
I have
living
messages.
in Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm just posting your YouTube link where they're in my Facebook profile, so just in case
Hold
there's
on a second,
anybody
Rebecca. Hold on.
that's following that. Okay.
For some reason, I don't know why. I just Are you there? I'm going to go back to Zoom.
Yes. Can you hear me?
I don't know why I'm here. I
Can you
hear
hear
you, but
me?
I'm not hearing you where I should.
That's not good.
Yeah. Anybody hear oh, you can hear Rebecca.
Some random G33K can hear me. So some random can hear.
Some random geek. For some reason I can't. I'm the only fucking person that can't hear you. I mean, I can hear you, but it's weird. I'm not hearing you through my headset.
Well, and as far as I know, you're not fucking right now either.
Oh, no shit. I'm going to switch over to my headset because I am hearing you weird,
Okay.
oddly enough. Actually, you know what? I think maybe I might have shut off my.
Now I can actually see. While you were trying to bring me on, I was pulling up the YouTube page that you just mentioned, so I can actually read some of the comments.
Yeah.
From your audience. So,
Okay. So I now that I have I don't know what happened to my headset. It just totally died on me. I can hear you on this headset. So
okay.
yeah. But my hair doesn't look as good. So trade-offs.
So you asked me a question. Do you mind repeating that?
Yeah, I wanted you to talk about your you wrote something about Bernie, and I wanted you to kind of read that.
Okay. Well, I don't know if I want to read it word for word. Hold on, and especially since I just lost the link as I was making some adjustments. But I'd like to respond to, if you're all right with this, I'd like to respond to a lot of what you have just said, which is kind of going to touch on what I wrote anyways. I think first off, I think a lot of the things that you just mentioned are really good points as to why he's struggling in this Democratic primary as well as the last. I think I think that the idea that economic equality is going to cure all social injustice is really just an oversimplistic look at a lot of the problems that are going on, and I think it makes a lot of marginalized communities feel unheard and ignored. So I certainly agree with you in that regards. Conversely, I also think, ironically, a lot of the issues that Bernie has with the Democratic base might, and I'm not sure this, and I'm not quite sure this is a good thing, but this might actually make him more electable to a general electorate. So especially running against Trump.
Well, the thing is, though, I mean, this is the thing.
Yeah.
You get a lot of people that'll be like, well, he is the only one that can beat Trump in the general election. You know what? I agree. Joe Biden is going to get decimated. They are going to make him look like old, sleepy I mean, they already call him Sleepy Joe, but they're going to make him look like grandpa. He doesn't connect with the youth. And I come from Indiana, and I lived in Wisconsin for a decade. Two states that are purple. They're basically red, but sometimes they'll go purple. They elected Barack Obama in 2008. And with that, they had, they overwhelmingly voted for Trump in Indiana. And in Wisconsin, we all know how that turned out.
Yeah.
But the reality is, Scott Walker was the governor of Wisconsin for 3 or 4 terms. And the reason for that is the same thing. The people that they ran against him, they always ran against Scott Walker. They never ran for something.
Yeah. And that's where and that's, I think, the one advantage that Bernie does have has had over a lot of his opponents, both in this primary and the last primary, is he's at least running on something. And I think candidates that run on something generally do better in a general election. Whereas I wasn't quite able to understand like what Hillary Clinton was running on other than her experience, which can't be understated, but I think her experience was also an asset and as well as a liability. Whereas, and I think that's going to be the same thing for Joe Biden if he can keep it together, which I'm extremely worried about. But I think having a conversation about electability, which Bernie has clearly lost, is kind of a separate conversation from what we're talking about as well. So I do have the post up, so I'll go ahead and read this post that I posted this on my Facebook page on March 4th, which, by the way, I just want your listeners to know that generally I don't accept requests. I have a feeling I'm going to get a bunch of requests, Facebook friend requests from people I don't know. Please don't take it personal if I don't accept it. I'm trying to limit my Facebook page to people I know, at least until I create something that's more public. Anyway, so I wrote this the day after Super Tuesday. After taking the time to relax, digest, and reflect on what we witnessed on Super Tuesday, I have much to share. To start, Bernie's message is still not connecting with Black voters, especially older voters. I was hoping this would not be the case this time around, but the signs were there. I just didn't want to see them. But through my privileged white lens, this is what I now see. Bernie's constant repetition of the same talking points is not showing Black voters that he is listening to them. His social programs present a catch-22. On one hand, they come across as a colorblind failure to truly address systemic oppression. On the other hand, if his policy is racially competent, it presents a challenge to white supremacy that elicits fear of a Trump re-election, hence making the quote-unquote safe option of Biden attractive. And of course, so why don't we just stop with that point? I have a lot of different points, but why don't we just stop with that one and talk about that? Do you think I missed anything there?
No, I think
am I off base?
I think that is especially to the voter that is between, well, over 40. I mean, basically anyone over, I think, probably 35, 40.
Yeah.
If you look at who voted and how they voted, the 35 to 40 is where it starts, especially within the Black community. that's where it starts to decline for Bernie Sanders. And that is, I mean, there's a lot of history between Clinton and to be honest with you, I think a lot of that could have been pulled apart, especially with the history that people don't talk about. But Sanders needed to go into the black community and say, look, this, and not retread it as far as Clinton goes, but I just listened to a podcast today from The Intercept where they looked at Joe Biden, and he has an awful racist history from Anita Hill, how awful he treated Anita Hill, how he won't own up to that, how he called Strom Thurmond, one of the biggest racists to ever be in Congress, a good friend. I mean, you can go down, you can hit these, but he didn't go into the black community and hit these points. And, he says he doesn't play that kind of politics. To me, it's the same thing.
He's losing.
Exactly.
That's why he's losing. And I think, so this is definitely where I think you hit an interesting point here, because this is where Bernie Sanders is currently taking a lot of heat from his own base. With that, he's not like, in order to win, he's got to play by some of the same shady politics that have put just about everyone else into the Oval Office. Unfortunately, you can't take the moral high road, and this is where I didn't put this in my post, but I think this leads to a problematic electability argument. Like, if he's going to take the high road with fellow Democrats, is he going to try and do this? I don't think he would try to do the same thing with Donald Trump, but then again, he's not appealing to Donald Trump voters right now. So he can say whatever he wants about Donald Trump during the Democratic primary. But I think a legit concern is, would he soften his tone? And if he were to get the nomination, would he soften his tone and try to take this bullshit high road in a general election? If he did, he would lose.
Well, and that's but see, that is kind of where I think that there's an issue.
Yeah.
Because Bernie Sanders basically has got this backwards. You win the primaries first, and then you go to the general.
Yeah. No, that might be where he's going senile. Who knows? I think I kind of wonder if he went into this, if he went into this primary making kind of the same mistake that Hillary Clinton made in 2016.
I think
I
so.
got this.
I think he just thought that it was going to be more of the same, and at the core, I think the problem is that he's now. I'll be honest with you. I am somewhere along the spectrum of democratic socialist to an anarcho-syndicalist, kind of somewhere.
Yeah.
My politics are pretty left.
Yeah.
I did one of those political maps, and it was somewhere between Emma Goldman and Peter Kropotkin, so it's pretty left. But I also have the history of being in the Obama campaign and seeing it work and seeing it be successful. And then I have the experience of volunteering for the Sanders campaign in 2016 and not having that same experience. Not even having, they never called me back. I reached out to them and I never got a response, even to Phone Bank. And I was just like, wow, this is not going to go well, because you have to, you have to do outreach, and you have to have your your campaign build on itself. I mean, that's exactly what Obama did. And
right. Well, and I think that that leads to some of my other points around his electability. You've got, if you cannot figure out how to get young people to get off their ass and vote in a primary, what makes you think that it's going to happen in a general election? And I think that's a real problem for Bernie right now, is because he has been running on this, I will bring new people into the political process. Where are they?
yeah,
They haven't showed up so far.
well, and that also is something that I think is probably, I can't say he hasn't brought anyone in, but the people that, let's face it, the stark reality is, and this is the same in America, it's the same in the UK. If the youth vote actually got out and vote in the numbers that they are in the electorate, Bernie Sanders would win, Jeremy Corbyn would win, but they don't vote. You know who votes? Old people vote. The older they get, the more likely they are to vote. Right. So it's frustrating. In the chat,
I think I know what comment you're about to respond to. Please.
Well, I'm gonna respond to quite a few of them. Some random geek said John Kerry in 2004 was the "I'm not George Bush" candidate. That's exactly what I'm getting at. That John Kerry was actually the "It's my turn" candidate. It was his turn, essentially. And my turn candidates hardly ever win. Hillary Clinton didn't win. John Kerry didn't win. Bob Dole didn't win. I mean, we can go down the list of people whose time it was for them to be the nominee. And Leto asked if Bernie was fucked even in the states they haven't even voted yet. That depends. I mean, a lot of it has to do with the fact that you have early voting. So I would say so. When it comes to the early voting.
Can I respond to that one, Marty?
Sure.
I think, like, ever since Super Tuesday 2.0, I've been wrestling with myself on whether I think, and I would like to throw this question to you as well, but I've been wrestling on whether Bernie should drop out at this point. And I kind of see multiple conflicting arguments here. You know, on one hand, numerically, he still has a chance of winning based on just the large number of states that haven't voted yet. Practically speaking, when you look at momentum, when you look at polls, and you look at the fact that I don't think Bernie's campaign knows how to make adjustments at all. It just seems highly unlikely that anything is going to change. I know a lot of supporters. I've been having conversations with a few Bernie supporters this week that I think there are some folks that are holding out hope that if this debate even happens this weekend, that Joe Biden is going to show everybody what his real problems are, which I think is highly unlikely. Even if Joe Biden does have a horrible debate performance, I don't think it's going to swing the momentum at all. So knowing the direction that the momentum is going, knowing the poll of future states like specifically Florida and New York, which don't look good for Bernie, you have to ask yourself, like, if you really want to defeat Donald Trump, then probably dropping out early as opposed to later is going to increase our chances of unifying. And let's face it, Joe Biden is going to need if Joe Biden is going to be the nominee, which appears to be likely at this point. Joe Biden is going to need all the help he can get at this point.
Well, I can tell you, Bernie is not going to drop out.
Yeah.
He's going to go to the convention with his delegates, and he will have a strong, bargaining position from the standpoint of what policies that he wants to see in place.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, my biggest problem is that Bernie can win the general. He would slaughter Trump.
I believe that too.
He would absolutely slaughter Trump.
This narrative that a socialist or somebody with socialist policies is unelectable is something that's being thrown by the forces that are
the forces that said Hillary Clinton was going to win in 2016.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think now I want to respond to your point that he will stay until the convention. I think in some way, I don't fault him so much for doing that in 2016, although I think a lot of people point to that as a reason Clinton lost. And I think that's the part. This is why I loved your post that you made, that you talked about at the beginning of the show. Is I think a lot of people like to blame Bernie and his supporters as the sole and only reason that Clinton lost in 2016. And I've wasted my time with many Facebook fights on that very subject. And it's like they want to ignore all the other factors.
But I don't think that now I'm in this weird position because there was just a study that came out that said that Bernie bros weren't any more toxic than other supporters.
Yeah, I saw that article.
That being said, I've done the same thing. I look at Bernie this way. He is not perfect. To be frank with you, I think that he can use racist tactics at times, and we can go into that. But he has the best policy positions that I'm looking for. I wish he on foreign policy. I wish he was more like Mike Revelle, but he's not. He's not perfect, but he's the closest that I see to what I want in government in the United States. That being said, he's a horrible politician. He's a horrible campaigner.
Yes.
He's horrible.
Yes.
And people don't talk about this. Oh, he's changing people's minds, blah, 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 blah. Yes, he can bring 10,000 people to a crowd, but do those 10,000 people phone bank for him? Do they work at the polls? Do they, he is an Obama. And to be honest with you, I want a socialist, a democratic socialist or a socialist. I don't give a shit. I want somebody that's going to be to the left of FDR. But because this country is, especially, we're not going to get into this, but with the coronavirus and stuff like that, you're seeing the cracks in the American safety net. There isn't one. It's a fucking circus with no net.
See, and I think that you make a good point there. Like, now that we're definitely looking at Biden's electability and Biden as the nominee, I really hate to say this, and I don't want to see it go down this way, but I have a feeling the coronavirus is going to help him get elected. I hope I'm wrong about that, because how many people are going to die before that really starts to have a political impact? But needless to say, like, this is just how weak Biden is going to be in the general electorate. That is largely, I think the general electorate is largely anti-establishment. The anti-establishment mood in this country is something that the establishment, which is a term that I'd love to discuss with you because I think a lot of people view that term very differently.
Yeah, I think that's pretty easy though. I mean, honestly, in America, in the UK, people were sold a bill of goods with neoliberalism, with Bill Clinton, with Gordon Brown, and over here, and Tony Blair. They were basically conservatives in liberal clothing. They were, in America, we called them Dinos, Democrats in name only. They, like Bill Clinton, got rid of Glass-Steagall. It was the only thing that kept people from predatory loans and that kind of thing. And look how the housing crisis happened in 2008 because of Bill Clinton, and the deregulation that happened during his administration. It was also a Republican, Congress. That being said, if you look at real wages, they haven't changed basically since Nixon.
Yeah.
And you had people coming in saying, we're going to make things better. We're anti-establishment. I can think of Reagan. I think it was in 84 that he got a second term. And Barack Obama. But other than that, it's been, we're going to change things. Things are going to be different. You're going to get more money. Your life's going to be better. And it just never has.
Yeah. Yeah, no. And this is what the Democratic Party establishment, like Joe Biden will talk about it and give, like a lot of the establishment politicians will give platitudes regarding these things. But when you look at their specific policies, you're wondering, well, how is that going to adequately address this issue? I want to talk a little bit about the word establishment, just because I think that I've seen some Bernie attack pieces out there. And it's interesting just that aside from the fact, when you talk about electability, I mean, there's an ungodly number of Bernie attack pieces that you see coming from pretty much every avenue of the press. And I think that the difficult thing about those is separating the wheat from the chaff. And because there are a lot of legitimate points that a lot of these articles make. And I think like there was one article that attacked that was attacking Bernie because, of his, talking about the establishment. And they're saying, well, Bernie's attacking the establishment. Therefore, he's attacking Democratic voters who are very loyal to the Democratic Party and are always going to vote blue no matter who. So Bernie's attacking you people. How do you feel about that? And so I think just for the purposes of our conversation, just in case there's anybody that buys into that, when I talk about establishment, I would generally think that, Marty, this is probably the same for you. When I talk about establishment and when I hear Bernie talk about the establishment, we're talking about politicians and special interests who are aligned with
what is going on here, and is this any?
Well,
and we're not talking about voters.
Well,
at least that's the way I look at establishment.
Well, I think I just want to play this. This is an example of what you were talking about as far as the wheat from the chaff. This was I believe it was right before Super Tuesday, or it was right after Super Tuesday. Let me bring this up.
Way to pick a nominee.
Well, I don't think so, but it is the way we're picking this one, and it looks like Bernie Sanders is hard to beat right now. I'm with Carville all the way in terms of the dangers of what lies ahead in November. I'm very much aware of them. They're sitting on so much Oppo research on Bernie, what he said in the past about world affairs, how far left he is. I'm not sure how far left he is, but they're going to make the most of that in terms of world politics. They're going to kill him. But I think it's a little late to stop him, and I think that's the problem. By the way, if you look at the pattern, it's dynamic. Bernie won the popular vote in Iowa. He won it again in New Hampshire. It looks like he's going to win it here when they finally get a vote. Bernie's been winning consistently, and I think it's mathematically understandable. Every time we poll, every time Steve and everybody polls, 2/3 of the Democratic vote, 2/3 of people who call themselves Democrats are either liberal or very liberal. All Bernie ever had to do, and he's done it beautifully, is get a majority of that, and he's up to the mid-30s. If you get half of 67, you're into the mid-30s, and that's where he's gotten it a little better. Biden, his only prayer was to consolidate the third of the vote that's moderate and conservative. And he got nowhere near clearing that field, nowhere near. That's split up 4 ways now. And so with new people coming in, Deval Patrick came in, he didn't make it. Bloomberg is in, he's probably going to survive a bit longer because of his money. But that field wasn't cleared. The only way Biden could win in that 1/3 of the vote that's either moderate or conservative is to sweep it. He got nowhere near. Bernie, on the other hand, did his job. He got more than a majority of that 67%. That is the name of the game. It is pretty much over unless that changes. I was reading last night, Brian, I know you're a history guy too. I'm reading last night about the fall of France in the summer of 1940. And the general, Renault, calls up Churchill and says, it's over. And Churchill said, how can it be? You got the greatest army in Europe. How can it be over? He said, it's over. So I had that suppressed feeling. I can't be as wild as Carville, but he is damn smart. And I think he's damn right on this one. Joy.
So even when you're getting praise, you're being compared to Hitler.
Yes.
And this is not Fox News. This is the liberal MSNBC. Now, Chris Matthews is now gone because he has
rightfully so.
Yeah, had a few issues with women, and that came to light after that. But that being said, I mean, this is his friendly media. This would be the equivalent of Fox News for progressives. I mean, the only way you get more progressive than MSNBC is if you go online to something like oh God, what is I'm forgetting the name of Yank Huger. The Young Turks or stuff like that. But in mainstream media, on cable news, this is the most liberal that you're going to get,
Yeah. Well, and if I could respond to that, kind of talking a little bit about the progressive movement in general, I think this whole concept of Bernie Bros, it is real. Now are Bernie supporters as an average any nastier than supporters of any other candidate? I'm not so sure I buy that. But because of the size of the movement that is following Bernie, and because of, I think, the frustration that a lot, especially for older progressives, who the only time of the year our voice we even feel heard is during a Democratic primary, and then that voice eventually gets snuffed out. I think every time us older progressives go through a Democratic primary only to be told that our voice doesn't matter, and to have whoever the nominee is confirm that by completely ignoring us, even after they get elected, if the party is so lucky for that to happen. That frustration, I think, is just building and building and building. And I think for a lot of older voters, it's not as much as, oh my God, I think Bernie is amazing. He's like Jesus, he's just perfect. I think it is when are you going to start listening to us?
Yeah.
And I think that's where, responding to your point earlier about Bernie not dropping out until the convention, I think like he's kind of reverted back to his 2016 strategy of, okay, well, if I'm not going to win, then I want to make sure that these people are not completely ignored. It didn't work last time, though. So this is where Bernie needs to do something that his campaign, and I don't know how this works in the inner workings of this, but this is where Bernie Sanders' campaign really needs to reach out to the Biden campaign and go, I bet you'd love it if we dropped out right now.
Well,
the Biden campaign would go, yeah. So we can do this, but this is what we're asking for you in return.
Well, and the thing is, to be honest with you, when it comes down to that, I don't see that happening. But I would say that if I were Bernie, I would be asking essentially that a progressive be named as vice president. I wouldn't I wouldn't go any less. I wouldn't push for anything less than that.
Yeah.
There are plenty of candidates out there. You know, when you were saying about 2016, when it came to the convention and that not amounting to anything as far as the Sanders campaign, things did change. There were things that happened within the structure of the DNC that did change, but I agree. He needs to get a lot more out of it this time.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I think Bernie going to the waiting, not dropping out at all, and taking things to the convention like he did in 2016. Not only is that a bigger mistake this time because he's just, even compared to 2016, he's getting his ass whipped. But like the longer he stays in this race and the more humiliating defeats the Sanders campaign endures, the less leverage he's going to have. So I think the sooner, and I say this with a heavy heart, and I also say this acknowledging in advance, like, I apologize to the voters who have not had a chance yet to voice themselves in the Democratic primary, especially the progressives. But really, like, the longer he lets this string out, I don't see his leverage increasing. I just don't see how that plays out. So,
well, I will say though that the reality is that if Joe Biden does the same thing, because Hillary Clinton made a huge mistake in 2016 in her choice of someone that was more conservative than her in picking her vice presidential nominee. She should have picked a progressive. She just should have. I would like to see Joe Biden pick someone like Stacey Abrams in Atlanta, who's very progressive, but someone along those lines. Elizabeth Warren, of course, but he has got to pick that caliber of progressive to actually even have a chance. If he does the same thing Hillary does and picks some middle of the road milquetoast white guy, you're fucked.
No, and that's I don't see, I can see why Clinton did that from I want to get the sexist white male vote perspective, but of course she was ignoring the progressive community almost entirely. I don't know a ton. The only thing I really know about Stacey Abrams is, she showed up on my radar when she gave the Democratic response to the State of the Union. Um, so, like, I'm going to take your word for it that she's a progressive, and if that's true, I would be thrilled with that. Another name that I'd like to float out there that Biden could pick that could go a long way is, what's your opinion on Nina Turner?
Well, I've heard other people kind of put her out there. She's certainly got the voice for it,
Yeah.
but I don't know that she has the experience. I mean, both candidates are old. And let's face it, I wouldn't be shocked if either one of them was elected that they died in office. I wouldn't be to be frank with you, who's left, be it Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, or Joe Biden. I think there's a good chance that any of them, given their age, could die in office. It's likely.
Oh yeah. No. I think, like, and I think you may have been responding to the same thing I just responded to in chat about picking Bernie as VP, and I think, yeah, no. I love Bernie, but
I would love that. I think that would win. I think that would be a winning strategy. But that being said, I don't think that does not happen. That's not the way politics works. It just doesn't.
Right.
I mean,
well, and here's what would be interesting about that, though, is, God forbid, or whoever you pray to forbid, that, let's say, they decide to go with that ticket and both of them die while in the White House.
Nancy Pelosi becomes president.
Then the president would be the
Speaker of the House,
leader of the House, and we better sure as hell hope that if that is a winning ticket, that that people vote Democrat in the down ballot.
Well, I'm not. Some random geek said they should pick a Pete Buttigieg. He is young. No.
I worry that that's who Biden might pick.
Yeah.
I mean, he's that is not that. If he picks if Biden ends up picking one of the other moderates that endorsed him, he's basically doing what Clinton did and gave a big fat middle finger to the progressive coalition.
Well, and I think that I do want to mention some of the comments in chat.
Yeah.
Some random geek, who is one of my favorite. Leto was also one of my favorites, but she left. She left me. But some random geek is awesome. He said in the chat, he said there are probably a lot more Bernie supporters online than any other candidate. I would agree with that. So the venom is from the most toxic ones. They're the most excitable ones. They're the ones that go around, and I agree with that. One of the problems I have is the cult of personality that he seems to people that and the kids these days, they'll call it standing, but basically they see there's nothing that their candidate can do. I mean, it's the same cult of personality that Trump has. Some random geek also said, I wonder if Bernie is picked for VP, how many of the Bernie or bust crowd would vote for Biden in the general? I think that just like I just said, I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Yeah, I hope you're right, Marty.
Really. It would be. I mean, if you go back and you look at VP choices, they are always, or I can't remember one that was picked out of kind of. Biden was one, but he dropped out early because he in the when going against Obama and Hillary. I mean, he if I remember correctly, he dropped out really early. But usually, somebody won't pick from the people that ran with him just because. I mean, they're going after him.
Yeah.
But
I think that. Go ahead.
Well, and Anti-Demon in the chat said, even as a Bernie supporter, the cult of personality is unsettling for me. And thank you, praise Jesus.
Yeah,
exactly. It is so. I always think it's all about the policy. It's all about the policy. It's not about the person. He's not a god. Frankly, he is a horrible campaigner. I shouldn't say he's racist, but he has done things that are racist. Like,
right. Well,
like,
can we talk about that for a minute?
Sure.
Yeah. So first off, I think when a lot of white people talk about racism, we have a tendency to frame it in terms of a binary. Either somebody is a binary that's also a noun. Somebody is a racist or somebody is not a racist. And while while that can be true, I think with most of us, and especially Bernie in this case, it's not a matter of if we are a racist or we are not a racist. It's a matter of how racist are we as a white person being in any particular given moment, both publicly and privately. And I think that's when we're talking about Bernie, I that's how I see that dynamic.
Well, I think when you have people that how white and black people talk about racism is totally different.
Very much so.
When a white person's talking about racism, they're talking about the KKK.
Yeah.
Burning crosses and that type of stuff. Typically, when black people talk about racism, they're talking about institutionalized racism. They're talking about systemic racism.
Yeah.
And white people generally don't want to acknowledge systematic racism because then they would have to do something about it.
Yeah, and that is that is a level of racism in and of itself, and that's where when we don't want to acknowledge our own role in these systematic problems, and this is I think really hits on one of Bernie's problems with trying to with black voters, is he just, like I think a lot of white folks, he wants to just pretend that economic equality will solve it all.
Well, and this is a side note, but I do want to play this. I do want to because this is something that I heard some time ago that I think is perfect when you want to talk about racism.
Race, the final frontier. No matter what channel you watch, no matter what feed you aggregate, it seems like everybody everywhere is talking about race right now. And when everybody everywhere is talking about race, that means sooner or later you're gonna have to tell somebody that they said something that sounded racist. So you need to be ready and have a plan in place for how to approach the inevitable that sounded racist conversation. And I'm going to tell you how to do that. The most important thing that you've got to do is remember the difference between the what they did conversation and the what they are conversation. Those are two totally different conversations, and you need to make sure that you pick the right one. The what they did conversation focuses strictly on the person's words and actions and explaining why what they did and what they said was unacceptable. This is also known as the that thing you said was racist conversation, and that's the conversation that you want to have. The what they are conversation, on the other hand, takes things one step further and uses what they did and what they said to draw conclusions about what kind of person they are. This is also known as the I think you are are a racist conversation. This is the conversation you don't want to have, because that conversation takes us away from the facts of what they did and the speculation about their motives and intentions, and those are things you can only guess at, you can't ever prove, and that makes it way too easy for them to derail your whole argument. And that is the part that's crucial to understand. When you say, I think he's a racist, that's not a bad move because you might be wrong. That's a bad move because you might be right. Because if that dude really is racist, you want to make sure you hold him accountable and don't let him off easy. And even though intuitively it feels like the hardest way to hit him is just run up on him and say, I think your ass is racist, when you handle it that way, you're actually letting him off easy because you're setting up a conversation that's way too simple for him to derail and duck out of. Just think about how this plays out every time a politician or a celebrity gets caught out there. It always starts out as a what they did conversation, but as soon as the celebrity and their defenders get on camera, they start doing judo flips and switching it into a what they are conversation. I have known this person for years, and I know for a fact that they are not a racist, and how dare you claim to know what's inside their soul just because they made one little joke about watermelon tap dancing and going back to Africa. And then you try and explain that we don't need to see inside their soul to know that they shouldn't have said all that about the watermelon, and you try to focus on the facts of the situation, but by then it's too late because the what they are conversation is a rhetorical Bermuda Triangle where everything drowns in a sea of empty posturing until somebody just blames it all on hip-hop and we forget the whole thing ever happens. Don't let this happen to you. When somebody picks my pocket, I'm not going to be chasing him down so I can figure out whether he feels like he's a thief deep down in his heart. I'm going to be chasing him down so I can get my wallet back. I don't care what he is, but I need to hold him accountable for what he did. And that's how we need to approach these conversations about race.
And that is right on the money. I think when you have these conversations, my biggest example of this is how Bernie acted after when he was asked about Tamir Rice, and he basically said that the police needed retraining, and I was just like, oh, Jesus fucking Christ, you're not. This isn't something that.
Who's going to retrain those police? What are they going to retrain them in? And is that going to result in a better outcome?
This was a fucking 10-year-old child that was murdered when he had a toy gun, and
Right.
and it's a slap in the face to say, oh well, we're gonna even to say we're gonna have the Justice Department look into it. I mean, another thing that I thought was horrible was that he responded how the DNC told everyone, and this is not me saying it. People want to point, the Russians and the guess what? The stuff that was leaked by the Russians, none of it was false. It was ever shown to be false. It was ugly, but one of those memos, those John Podesta memos, guess what it said? Don't respond to Black Lives Matter. Don't give them any policy positions. Don't respond to them. Bring them in, listen to them. Don't publicly put out any policy. And Bernie Sanders followed that. He followed it just the same as Clinton. So that, and I can point to how he fucking campaigns. Again, this is all part of it. It's about race and not about, what we need is a progressive that is not only talking about class politics and income inequality, but it also is intersectional.
Well, and here's and I agree with you wholeheartedly on that, but I'm also going to push back a little bit with a question here too, because I wonder if it might be a little bit of a catch-22. Like if we nominate, if we have a progressive Democratic candidate that is truly intersectional, they'll own the Democratic Party for sure. I think they would easily win that primary, rightfully so.
Barack
as
Obama.
racist as-
Barack
Yeah.
Obama could have been that politician. He had a window in time from 2008 to 2010 to do that, and
Right.
and he became an establishment Democrat that wasn't transformational. He talked about change, but he did not. I mean, I just thought of a funny.
the
He
sign-
made people lose change.
Yeah, the signs were there. The signs were there in the general election because I think, unfortunately, like it's interesting how like little he talked about race when he in the general election, and he ran on essentially what were platitudes, and I think because of just like. But by and large, generally, I think people saw him as a progressive, and I think that's what helped him win initially in 2008. But my question is, and this is kind of what I wonder, if we have a progressive that runs a policy-based campaign like Bernie did, but is also intersectional, I really wonder in an environment in the kind of environment we have now, whether that intersectionality is going to be an asset or a liability in the general election. Great. Just so I'm clear, I'm not arguing that that should stop somebody from running as an intersectional candidate. But the question is does intersectionality hurt someone's electability, especially if they have progressive platform?
Not in the Democratic Party. I mean, that's the thing.
No, but I'm talking about in the general election.
Oh no. That's the thing. You can't run as you have to run as a fucking Democrat in the Democratic Party. You can't run as a Republican. Bernie's policy, Bernie's populism works. It does in the general.
Right.
It wouldn't work. It's not working in the primaries, and you have to win the primaries first. I mean, fuck.
Yeah. No, but that's. I think you're misunderstanding my question then, because I'm not like.
I think Bernie Sanders.
My question is
I think a candidate. I know what your question is.
Yeah.
But I think someone like Bernie Sanders that was intersectional could win. But they need, because Barack Obama already laid down the groundwork on how to do this. It's not hard.
Uh-huh.
He already laid the groundwork on how to beat the establishment candidate. You have to go into communities. The communities that are going to elect you. You can't pander to community. Look, you know who the last politician to get white male voters into the Democratic Party as a majority? You know who the last politician to do that was?
I'm sure you're about to tell me.
It was Johnson. 1969.
Oh, Jesus.
White men.
Oh, he was awful. I wasn't alive then, but everything that I've learned about LBJ makes me grimace.
Well, and the thing is, that was during war, and there's a lot that you could point to with that.
Mm.
I'm not going to say in any way what that actually means in the context of during that time. But what I'm going to say is that is not who's going to get you elected in the Democratic Party today.
Well, and I guess I will just say that, like, I appreciate that perspective and reminder. It's easy to question that in an era when our country will elect somebody like Donald Trump.
Well, I think they elected Donald Trump because he was a populist, and B, he said he was going to change things. And he plays into, so in the Democratic Party, well, even in the Republican Party, there are 30% roughly. And I'm not saying that, I'm not pulling this out of my ass. If you go look in 2007, 2008, where George W. Bush was polling, he was polling at about 28%. So when he had taken us into two wars, one that with no evidence, he had crashed the economy of the fucking world. There were still 28% of the American electorate that would vote for that son of a bitch.
Yeah.
He's a fucking war criminal.
Yeah.
And there are still 30%, roughly 30% that will vote for him. So you need another 20% to win. And I think that's roughly along the same lines in the Democratic Party. And but I don't think independents are necessarily either progressive or conservative. I think there's a big hunk of people out there that want change, want the establishment, want neoliberal policies to stop. I mean,
yeah. And I think some of those people certainly did vote for Donald Trump in 2016, and that also might explain some of the mystifying crossover between people who voted for Bernie in the primary and then turn around and voted for Donald Trump in the general election. I can't get it's really, really difficult, even though that's still really difficult for me to wrap my head around.
Here's the thing with that, though. I to be honest with you, I had a really hard time with Hillary Clinton for one major reason. My experience with her as a politician, when she was a politician in New York State, when she was a senator from New York, she came in 2006 to a what was it? New York State Pride Agenda dinner, and she was asked if she would support trans inclusion into the federal bills that were being put forth, in hate crimes and INDA. And you know what she said? Well, the gays haven't asked me to. And in 2013, she was still against marriage equality. I believe it. No, not 2013, but before 2000, roughly, she supported marriage equality just when it was just right at the point that it was acceptable as a party for her to do so. She never took any risks. And
that's the Democratic Party as a whole.
Possibly. But that being said, I have to acknowledge, she's a calculating politician. I have to acknowledge that because in this election cycle, there was a progressive that should have done much better than she actually did, and that's Elizabeth Warren. And when I look at it, I think it's misogyny.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think the fact that Elizabeth Warren is a woman is why she did so badly.
Right. Well, and I think let's talk about that, because I think that's I think you make really good points. I want to go back to, like, there was a time where Elizabeth Warren was topping the polls, and then she released her. So during the time Elizabeth Warren was topping the polls, talk to me, what do you think? What is your take on the events that transpired that kind of led her that kind of finished off her campaign?
I think the polls were off. To be honest with you, I don't think that people really coming from Indiana, let's just put it that way. My experience is that there's so many people out there that actually hated Clinton, that hated Hillary Clinton for no fucking good reason other than she was a woman. So much sexism.
Yeah.
Well, Hillary Clinton's a bitch. You know, that's, you know, and this is a woman that stood by her husband when he cheated on her. You know, this is, you want to talk about fucking family values. I mean, these motherfuckers that are over here preaching that shit, that's what she did. She stayed with her husband, even though he cheated on her. You know, that's what you go to church on Sunday. That's what you're going to hear at the pulpit, you know, that you need to forgive. You need to, you know, and oh my God. I mean, the misogyny, it was horrible. But I think what I kept going back and forth between support for Bernie and Elizabeth Warren. What did bother me with her campaign was when she talked about what Bernie had said to her privately.
Yeah. Well, that's when her support was that's when her support plummeted. And I think, so before we get into that, I just want to respond to what you just said. I think like this misogyny that both Clinton faced and what Warren has recently faced, that we're kind of getting ready to delve into a little bit more, is also very much a factor when we talk about how personality is what drives our votes. Like, for you and I are kind of the weirdos in that we prefer policy, you know, but a majority of the American electorate, if you ask the average American voter, why do you like X and X candidate? They're almost always inevitably going to come up with an answer that is different, that has nothing to do with policy. And that's what I think really just paves the way and really invites all of the isms into liking or disliking a candidate, especially sexism, misogyny in this particular case in terms of Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren. If policy doesn't play any role, then of course you're going to, and we all know that women get judged differently than men in the public sphere. Then of course this is going to play a huge role, especially if personality, if personality drives your vote and your like or dislike of a candidate over policy.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with teams. You know, there was memes back in the day where they talked about team this and team that, and I'm just like, when it comes to politics, it has to be about the policy. It has to be, otherwise you're going to end up supporting someone that is a monster. And I think we've already seen that. And to be honest with you, so if Biden is the candidate, we're going to have two men that have been accused of being sexually inappropriate with women.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And you know who's going to win that argument? Trump. Because for whatever reason, for whatever mystifying fucking reason, Trump can get away with all of those things. But the moment a Democrat does a fraction of what Trump does on almost a daily fucking basis, man, that Democrat's in trouble.
Well, the reality of that is that Democrats are held up to their to actual standards that they say that they're for, whereas Republicans, it's just in fact
it is 100% personality, and I do think kind of the two things that did, like you mentioned, populism helped Donald Trump get elected. it was also racism. If we were to simplify Donald Trump's election in 2016 to two factors, it was populism and racism.
I think there was a post about
it had nothing to do with policy.
Well, there was a post.
Okay, that's not 100% true, but yeah, you get my gist.
Well, there was a post that I read some time ago that talked about we need to stop calling Republicans on their hypocrisy because they don't give a shit.
No.
They are not fazed by being called out and being wrong. When you have somebody like Mitch McConnell that can turn on a dime, he can sit there and say, "Oh, we need to have this person vetted, blah 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 blah, and it's important that the process work, blah 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 blah." And then a Republican comes in, and suddenly those things don't fucking matter anymore, and nobody cares. Nobody cares. They're not held to the same ethically, morally, nothing. They're not, because they just care about power at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I think you're hitting on the establishment. Like, I think when it comes to those dynamics, there's very little difference between the establishment of the Democrat and the Republican Party, because Democrats are quick to attack Republicans for things. There's that level of hypocrisy also exists in the Democratic establishment as well.
Well, I don't think to that much. Well, I think Auntie Demon in the chat actually says it pretty well. She said, when a Dem does it, it's hypocritical. When a Republican does it, it's business as usual. That's right on the money. That's right on the money.
That's I can't disagree with that.
And Auntie Demon actually said in the chat, she said, I have mixed feelings on intersectionality. On one hand, I ditched Bernie for Warren because she made a great effort to reach out to disabled people, but she had to drop out for a reason. Yeah. I think I kept going back and forth because
me too.
What the thing that she did to Bernie, she shouldn't have talked about. It looked blazing. It looked very calculated to call Bernie a sexist, because there is a context, 2016, pointing to Hillary Clinton's loss.
Yeah.
There is a context where you could say a woman is not electable as president, and I think that I think that this Elizabeth Warren is probably, in my estimation, establishment candidates, she is by far the most she has the most experience as far as and as far as foreign policy. Her positions are very.
Are we talking about Clinton or Warren?
Warren.
Okay.
She has experience. She has a lot of experience fighting corruption with in the finance sector. She headed Obama's branch of the government that dealt with that. She has a lot of experience, and she got her ass handed to her, and there's a reason for that. It's misogyny. But that being said, she tried using that as a weapon against Bernie, and that really, I thought it was obvious.
Well, can I respond to just that point? Or actually, sorry, finish what you were saying. I'll try.
No, go ahead.
I think, and so like you, I would say prior to that point, I was gravitating towards Warren for many of the reasons we've talked about in this show so far regarding the vulnerabilities and faults of Sanders in his campaign. for a lot of those reasons, and I would say definitely the intersectionality reason is what started pulling me towards Elizabeth Warren. The thing that has made me nervous about Elizabeth Warren is when she even admitted this after she dropped out, that she was trying to find a lane that's somewhere in between the establishment and progressives. Like, she was trying to carve that out. And I think the things that I think made me nervous about her is every once in a while she has a tendency to be influenced by what establishment politicians are telling her. Like, we know that there were a couple of people from the Clinton campaign that were also on her campaign. And I think when she started getting, according to the polls, whether they be correct or not, she was at the top of those polls and then she started getting the same level of heat about her Medicare for All policy that Bernie Sanders had gotten, and even more because she wasn't answering. Like, I remember one debate where she kept getting attacked that she wasn't being honest about how her Medicare for All policy would raise taxes. And for me, I just wanted her to say, look, it probably will. Now, I think this is where the misogyny comes in. If she had said that, it would have hurt her far worse than that admission hurt Bernie. But I also think that so that's when the cracks started to happen. And I think that when it came to the whole predicament about Warren calling Bernie a sexist, I think that was two. One, I think both candidates, I think the establishment press kind of set some traps for both of them, and both of them took the bait. But that was always going to hurt Warren worse than it would Bernie, regardless of who said what in that private meeting. Like, of course people were gonna believe Bernie over Elizabeth Warren, even if what Elizabeth Warren was claiming might have been true. And that's where I think the misogyny hurt her.
Well, the reality is, for any minority group, they always have to work harder, and that impact of things like that is always more. It's more of a cost always. I think that just comes with being in minority. That being said, the stuff with Medicare for All is so fucking easy to bat back, because you get. I heard people saying, and in fact, I heard it on a progressive radio show. They were like, "Well, Bernie Sanders says his policy will cost $32 trillion over 10 years," and I was like, really? I went and looked, and guess how much Americans pay per year right now for healthcare? $3.2 trillion a year. So guess what that costs in 10 years? Doesn't include everyone.
Yeah.
So literally,
I had a feeling that that's where they came up with that number. They were just assuming, well, it's going to be business as usual under Medicare for All.
That's the thing. Except with Medicare for All, if it costs exactly, I think it'd be less, because the overhead is the lowest. If you compare it to other plans, it's always been the lowest. But that being said, even if it costs the same, it still covers everyone.
Right.
You still cover everyone, and that's even with her. I don't think. I think what Bernie Sanders does so well is say, look, we're going to tax people, but it's going to be the fucking rich. I mean, if you want to point to something, I'll give you a good example. Social Security and Medicare. When people talk about that, what they don't realize and what nobody talks about is there's a cap. I believe it's about 200,000. If you're a millionaire, you pay into Social Security up to that point, and then you don't pay.
Yeah.
Those programs could be made solvent because they're going to go broke about the time I retire. But they could be solvent for the foreseeable future if it was just a straight percentage and there wasn't a cap. If you were a billionaire, you would pay, let's say it's 2%. You pay a straight 2%. That's it. Whether you're a billionaire, millionaire, make $40,000 a year, whatever, you pay it. But policies like that, for whatever reason, and I think it has more to do with the establishment not wanting to pay more money. That's me being cynical, but I think that's what it's got to do with. I do want to. This is the post that I was actually talking about earlier. I wanted to point it out. This. It says liberals stop trying to own conservative by their logic. They do not care. And it said, my God, the conservatives are not living up to their own standards. This is a common theme in liberal discourse. And today, one that has been exposed for the impotence time and again by the podcast Chapo Trap House. Conservatives complained. Summarize the liberal complaint sounds like this. Conservatives complained about this one thing that a liberal politician did, but now a conservative politician did the same thing, and they're not complaining anymore. It's a simple charge of hypocrisy, and it's very stupid. Why is it very stupid? Because it presupposes that the original complaint was made in good faith, based on some kind of principle, and wasn't just the ill-informed braying of a jackass mob. Yes, sure, there were problems with Hillary Clinton using a private email server, but let's not pretend for a second that the vast majority of conservatives weren't just using it as fodder to get their pitchforks out and rage against a hated opponent. They don't care about private email servers. They never cared about private email servers. They cared about drawing blood and defeating Hillary Clinton. And they certainly aren't going to care about Trump using a private email server. He could text Putin the nuclear codes tomorrow, accidentally copy Kim Jong-un, and then launch a warhead into Texas, and they'd find a way to rationalize it within 20 minutes. Sean Spicer would stand behind the podium in his giant suit and rave how the codes actually show toughness, and Kellyanne Conway would grin with her ghoulish grin on CNN while extolling North Korean work ethic, and then Trump would tweet about how cats are wicked, and the entire political right would nod along in confused agreement.
Could you imagine if a Democrat was responding to the coronavirus the same way Trump is right now?
Yeah, I mean, but
could you imagine the uproar from the right?
But again, I think it's exactly what Auntie Demon said. It's when a Democrat does it, it's hypocritical, and when a Republican does it, it's business as usual, because that's what they do. That's what they do. Some random geek in the chat says some of the conservatives will own themselves. Charlie Kirk and wearing a diaper to try to own the libs.
Yes. I think, I think you hit the nail on the head here. I think as we look at this upcoming general election, it's really, you're going to see these dynamics amplified time and time again.
Well, I do want to I want to wrap it up pretty soon, but right. I do want to talk about kind of where I think this is going to go. As far as the election, you already have people making excuses. You already have. This was a post today. By the way, I realized Bernie himself wasn't running around screaming about trans abortions or whatever all day like Warren, but the obsession with this insane rhetoric in the left liberal activist class infects all left liberal campaigns by osmosis, kind of like the coronavirus. So they're already blaming trans people for a Democratic loss.
Wow.
When will Democrats, when will leftists own their shit? Because Bernie Sanders is not winning right now, and you can boo-hoo as much as you want, but it's his own fault.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I think like, and this is where like, yeah, of course the Democratic establishment has aligned themselves against Bernie, but it's not like he didn't know this wasn't going to happen. Like, but he just, his campaign just does not have the ability to adapt to any kind of circumstance outside of what they see as happening.
Yeah, I and that's what would to be honest with you, that's what would worry me about him being in office, about being able to pivot.
Yeah. Yeah, no, seriously. Well, and some of it isn't. So when I asked you about Nina Turner earlier as another name that's been floated out there for VP, she definitely, I would say, amongst the Bernie camp that pays somewhat attention, she's definitely loved. The question I have for you is, a lot of Bernie's problems in connecting with the African American community, what role do you think Nina Turner is playing, either is or isn't playing in this?
I think that she's not a big enough name in she is within progressive circles, but she is not a big enough name in the larger
as far as the larger Democratic circles.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Some random geek in the chat said, after all, conservative yelled, how dare Obama put Dijon mustard on a sandwich, which inspired me. If you look what I posted, you remember when he was blasted for wearing a tan suit.
Oh my God. Some of the most ridiculous things. Like, I swear to God, like, no. I think that it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next couple of weeks. I would definitely say, like, I want to see how this debate goes this weekend if we have one. I want to see what happens on Tuesday and just how bad Bernie gets his ass kicked next. I think it's next Tuesday is the next vote when Florida is voting. And then I really like, I hope you're wrong about him taking his staying in this until the convention, because I don't think that will build momentum or build leverage for him. I think he'll just slowly lose leverage every time he gets his ass kicked. He's just going to lose more leverage.
But if you go back and look around the time that I posted what I posted in May of 2016, he was essentially in the same situation, and he started to do the same thing that you're talking about. He started to slide towards the convention, and he just didn't give a shit. He went to the convention with his delegates, and he's going to grab as many delegates as he can. He's got a handful already, and I don't think that. I think it is going to be. I think it's not going to. I don't think Joe Biden's going to get the amount of delegates that he needs to get by the end of the primary season. So I think it'll be a contested convention. That being said, I think Bernie Sanders loses that. You don't go into the DNC's house, and you have to kick their ass the way Obama kicked their ass. He wasn't the established. I mean, people will argue with me. Oh, here's an establishment candidate. He wasn't. Hillary Clinton was, and he handed her ass. I mean, he won Indiana, which has a history of having the head of the Klan was a governor in Indiana. It's got deep racist ties, and he won Indiana.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, like, if Bernie chooses to stay in this, it's either one of two things. Either it's he just can't, either he's just going to continue remaining completely blind to the inevitabilities of how this will play out and doesn't mind a repeat of 2016, or he is reaching out to the Biden camp and they're not giving him anything that they're not making any reasonable concessions.
Well,
who knows what's happening behind the scenes.
My hope, I'm not so much hoping that Bernie will do anything. My hope is that the Biden campaign actually has someone leading it. I don't believe it's the case, but I hope that they have someone leading the campaign that actually has some sense in their head and understands politically what they need to do. Because Hillary Clinton was tone deaf.
To unite the party.
Yes. It all comes down, and it's my opinion, it all comes down to the VP candidate. And it has to be a progressive. It has to be a progressive. If it is someone that's even remotely establishment, they're going to lose and lose badly.
Okay, what about Elizabeth Warren? Because I think the argument can be made that Elizabeth Warren is at least remotely establishment.
You could argue that, but I don't. It's something that you could argue, but I don't. I think she is progressive enough in her agenda.
I agree. I agree that I was just trying to gain an understanding of what you meant by like completely progressive or whatever.
Well, I tend to think it can take different looks. I mean, I think Sherrod Brown is somebody that is I think he needs to pick somebody that's definitely younger. Otherwise, I would say Mike Gravel, but somebody along the lines of Elizabeth Warren or
Stacey Abrams.
Something somewhere along that line. He needs to solidify progressives. And I think it has to be somebody that the frustrating thing is that Biden has said that he would veto Medicare for all.
Right.
And
no. I think that Biden, here's what I'd like to see happen, which is very similar to what yours is I would like to see Biden obviously pick a progressive candidate and make one concession, one fucking policy concession. You could even say to me, and this is just, I can only speak on behalf of myself as a voter, but if Biden came out and said, look, I've been against Medicare for all because I don't think I don't think we can pass it through even a Democratic Congress. But I'll tell you what, we're gonna try. We're gonna try our damnedest to get a Medicare for all bill passed through Congress. And here's why. And if you came out and said that, then one, you're starting with Medicare for all as your bargaining point, which could lead to a public option as a nice compromise. But if you start with a public option, we've already played that game. We ain't gonna get shit.
Yep. You never, I mean, I got frustrated a few days ago with a Biden supporter saying, well, it's not Medicare for all, it's not doable, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, you don't know how politics fucking works. This is ridiculous. You have the big ask that you ask for originally,
Yeah.
and then it gets pared down. That's exactly what happened with Obamacare. That being said, in the chat, some random geek said, I think Elizabeth Warren is progressive enough to work as the VP. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Daniel, one of my favorite Daniels of all time, Daniel Melman in the chat has something to say, and he thinks that that Biden should choose Ocasio-Cortez.
She's not old enough.
Yes,
I
she
think
is.
You have to be 35
to be
don't you,
president. To be president,
right? But if you're see, and I was having this conversation. I was having this conversation with one of my friends who buys into the anti-AOC bullshit. Like, I think, because I was thumbing through the Constitution on this, because you have to be 35 to be president, but to be when you're vice president, you're one heartbeat away from the presidency. Doesn't that disqualify you if you're not old enough?
Well, that's the thing. That's something that I don't think has been tested.
I don't think Biden will test that. However, like I said, we're looking 4 years down the road because Biden ain't going to be old. Biden ain't doing, even if he's fortunate enough to get elected, which both of us are skeptical of, he ain't doing no 2 terms. So I'm following AOC closely, and I'd love to see what happens 4 years from now in regards to her.
Well, I think she is the type of, to me, she's the prototype for the progressive wing of the Democratic Party.
I love that bitch. I love that bitch so much. I'm sorry. I know we've talked about the cult of personality. Sorry, I'm giving in on that one. I love her.
Well, she has a way of just crucifying her her opponents with the truth, and she can do it in a way that's very natural and very to the point. And she's again she's somebody that I love simply from the aspect of, you look at something as simple as, over here in the UK, there's this right-wing dickhead. His name is Graham Linehan, who is a comedy writer that basically he got called out about one of his comedy shows called The IT Crowd, about it being transphobic. It was very transphobic. Basically, it was basically someone got outed as a trans woman and they beat the shit out of her. And that was the premise of the show that he wrote. And he got all pissed off that people were calling him on it. And he turns into this hugely transphobic ass. And to the point where there was a stream. There's a guy on Twitch. His name is H Bomber Guy. He does videos on YouTube as well. But he did a 24-hour stream taking the piss on this guy and raised money for a trans charity for kids over here called Mermaids, and raised I think it was 320,000 pounds, or maybe it was dollars, I don't remember, but raised a shit ton of money basically on the back of this guy's bigotry. And guess who showed up? AOC showed up in the live stream. This isn't something that she needed to do, that politically was wise for her to do, but she has the pulse of the youth, and I think that she could inspire the youth to actually come out and vote.
Get off their ass, boy. I hope you're right about that, Marty. It's going to be interesting with AOC. It's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next month or so with this primary. There haven't been a lot of trustworthy polling that's come out of her district. But I would say that if she can manage to, her next test is, can she win as an incumbent? Being the person that she is. And we're about to find that out because she's got like eight or nine people challenging her in a primary. And one of the attacks they're making against her is very similar to an attack that she made against Joe Crowley, and is that, not spending enough time in her own district. And lately that's been true because she's been out on the stump for Bernie.
Well, and I think she has an easy way to jump back at that because
Yeah.
all the policies that she stands for, Bernie stands for. So it makes sense to campaign
Yeah.
for him because
Yeah.
that is going to help her constituents. To be honest with you, I think she will slay.
Do you
I
think
think she
she's
will
good? Do you think I hope so too. Like, so I think, yes, I think AOC is not, I don't think AOC is going away anytime soon. And that makes me giddy.
I wonder what I hope to see. I think Biden's going to lose, but I think that all depends on who his vice presidential choice is. But if it's a good choice and Democrats do take the presidency, they need people in Congress like AOC, like Ilhan Omar, like the squad, as they're called. There needs to be more of the squad.
Yeah. I think, yeah, no, there does. I think we've talked a lot about what we would like to see Biden do to unify the party. I've talked about what I think Bernie can do immediately to increase the chances of that happening. I think the one message, in case there's any Bernie or busters that listen to this stream or this podcast, the only thing that I can, this is my message to anybody who's either a never Biden or a Bernie or buster. Look, guys, I get the value of voting your conscience, and I appreciate that immensely. And I have spent a lot of time defending people's right to vote their conscience because I've always believed that a politician should adapt to the voter, not the other way around.
Yep.
That said, and I understand the frustration of the progressive movement. I understand all of that. We've talked a lot about that over the last couple of hours. That said, if you are a never Biden person or a Bernie or bust person, and you live in a swing state, if you live in a state that polling a couple of weeks before the election shows there's even a possibility of it swinging, which was the case with Utah in 2016, which is shocking, then consider the impact of your vote on disenfranchised communities that stand to be hurt the most by another 4 years of Donald Trump. At least consider that when you cast your vote. I hope that plays a role in you voting your conscience. That's all I want to say.
Well, I do think I agree with you, but that's a large ask, and I don't think that that's gonna sway a lot of people, unfortunately,
because they can't see past their privilege. I know that's a harsh statement, but that's how I feel.
It's complex. Yeah. But I think ultimately you can't force someone to vote the way you want, and that's essentially been the Democratic problem. In 2016 and again in 2020, you have a candidate that's being forced on the people by the party.
It sucks. It really does.
And
you're
going to ask people to essentially vote against their conscience. So as like I said, from being from the state of Indiana and living in Wisconsin and seeing how.
Notice I didn't say that though. I did not say that. I just want to make that clear.
I know.
I'm not asking people to vote against their conscience. I'm just asking for them to consider the role that their privilege plays in that the impact of their vote on those with less privilege.
I think the people that complain the most are those Bernie bros that are white that are not going to be affected when they're not going to not be able to get an abortion. You know, they're not going to have to worry about. I'm just trying to think of policy. They're not going to have to worry about being put in cages at the border.
Yeah.
You know, that stuff isn't going to impact them. So they can say, well, let it burn.
Or being politically and socially erased, which is what Trump is doing to our community.
I agree. In fact, yeah. I mean, that's my biggest issue with Democratic politics in the past decade is that they worried more about marriage equality than they did about basic civil rights for LGBT people. And they had good policies in place but they were only policies. They weren't law. And when Trump was elected, that put all that, you know, had NW been put in place, things would be a lot different. Right. You'd have to, it'd be a lot more, it'd be harder than it's going to be to erase trans people from society, basically. Yeah. That being said, thank you, Rebecca, for coming on to the show.
It's been fun. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you. I just stopped the audio recording. I'm still streaming on, but I'm going to upload this to
the stuff.
The audio podcast. I'm going to upload it, and we're going to stop the stream in a bit. But I kind of wanted to just talk about, because I didn't talk about it at the beginning. You and I used to have the raunchiest conversations, and I'm so glad that the episodes that we did on Tranny Wreck together are not publicly available.
I might have to go to archive.org and double check that fact. Here's the thing, like, I don't know if I'll ever run for office just because of Tranny Wreck Radio.
Well, it was funny because your show was very how could I put it? It was very cutting edge comedy wise, and it's kind of funny. I know you were mad at me for a while because I don't even remember what that was for. I made a decision to go into politics, more towards politics, and I felt like I either had to make a choice that I was going to seriously get into the political realm or seriously get into the comedy realm, because the stuff that we were doing, I had so much fun doing. Yeah, but it was raunchy. And well,
I'll tell you what, if I can even remember how to get in, access that material on archive.org, I will, if I find anything that has your name on it, I will go and delete it.
Oh,
but I'll tell you what, I'll send you, before I delete it, I'll send a link to you for it, just in case you decide you want to have a copy of that just for.
I would love that.
Just for nostalgia's sake.
Well, now that you've said that, there are people probably on the internet that are like typing furiously. Archive.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. Like, for those that are watching the stream, that's yeah.
Don't
anyway,
go there.
Imagine my shock. No, I think Was that the reason I was mad at you?
Well, that was my.
That was your recollection of it. Okay. Yeah, I was like, okay. Well, as you can tell, I hold grudges really well.
Well, it's funny because I really did absolutely love doing that, and it's kind of what pushed me to kind of do this again.
Yeah.
I loved doing. I used to do the Tea Party back in 2003, 2004, when I lived in Washington D.C. and I did it every night, Monday through Thursday, and then we did, and I'll say it not on the podcast, but I did Fat Tranny Circus.
Yes, I remember you started.
Back in the day when you could say the T word. But the Tea Party was something that I actually between the two, I kind of, that's where I want to go with this. I want to make it where people have a lot of fun, do a lot of sound effects. In fact, I have a whole fucking bank of sound effects here that I can play with. I just haven't kind of integrated them. I mean, I could say, but you know.
Yeah.
You are fake news.
Yes. Yeah. No, well, so let me share with you kind of just real quick where I'm at since Tranny Rec Radio, since you and I haven't really talked a lot. Well, one, doing this with you today. So one, I have had a hankering to do some sort of have a hankering to get back into online media. Doing this today only fueled that tremendously. So thank you for that. But two, like, if I do come back, I would do a YouTube channel, and it would be something short and highly produced clips. But when I look back on my Tranny Rec Radio days, I think the reason I decided to put them on archive is because, one, even though there's a lot of shit that I said in those podcasts where today I would be like, oh, fuck. Why the hell did I say that?
Who is the person that was it Madge? Was that?
Well, there's that. I mean, I had several personalities on. I had Madge Weinstein on. There's one show where if I find it, I might just delete it from this guy who is now a hardcore vegan that ended up blocking me on Facebook because, you know, I called him out on some stuff that he didn't appreciate. He ended up doing this. We had this really racist episode where he pretended to be an Indian called Alia Mahajani. And this is a white guy behind the microphone, and that's one of those episodes that I reflect back on. And I even had one of my listeners call me out on it, and I pushed back against the listener at the time, and now I'm like, oh my god,
yeah,
that's awful.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, like,
yeah,
I kind of knew at the time the kind of material that we were doing. It's kind of blue, and that I had a choice to make. Didn't you do some? You did some like, what was it? KWC or something?
Oh yeah, KBOO. Well, that's after I stopped podcasting. It was just a couple of years after I stopped podcasting that I started volunteering at Portland's community radio station.
Yeah, so you did some real shit. You did some real.
No, and our content and our mission there was all about social justice. And most of the people that worked and volunteered there would make you and I look like conservatives. As far as, maybe not you as so much, but because I think I might be a little bit, I'm probably somewhere in between Bernie and Elizabeth Warren politically. but then again, I'd have to reevaluate that statement too. But yeah, no, I think like for me, Training Rick Radio, I'm proud of it because it's a part of my past. It's a part of who I am, even if there's some content on there that I would find regrettable today. It was part of my growth and my learning curve. And the reason I decided to keep that stuff up is just because there might be some trans folks out there that listen to that and are benefit from listening to that content.
Well, and
So,
I think too, it's there are things about privilege that we shouldn't act like that we're perfect and that we
yeah,
I mean, because I've learned so much about the privilege that I have and
oh yeah,
how I can be what an ally looks like and so many things that I had no clue of back in the day.
oh yeah. Well, and I'll tell you, like, I think, and I was in the process of starting to learn about all of that at the time that I was doing that podcast. I'd taken a class, an undergrad class at Portland State University that talked about a lot of just kind of your privilege 101 concepts and what have you. But now, if I do anything now, I want it to be funny, but I also want it to make a point. And I think that is possible to be funny and also really kind of promote a social justice type of message, especially for me right now. And now that just to give you an update of where I'm at, I recently, last fall, I started in a master's program at the University of Utah. So I'm going to become a social worker.
That's awesome.
And that profession, if you go to the social worker code of ethics, it's all about social justice and being aware. Like I'm taking a class right now, it's called a reflexive class, where it delves into all of these topics. And it's funny to watch some of these white Mormon kids in my class get really uncomfortable when the subject of race comes up and how every white person is, and how not just every white person, how everybody is racist in some way or another, or just simply because we live in a racist society.
Well,
so,
I had to recently had a conversation with my own son because he's dealing with a Trumper, and I was trying to explain to him kind of like how, and I had to use that. I used that as an example, basically, in that if you're white, you're racist, and he pushed back on that, and I explained myself. I was just like, look, it isn't magic. You grow up in a racist society. You're not made of Teflon, and you're going to have racist. It's not you're not going to go out and burn a cross in somebody's yard, but I'll give you a good example from myself. Basically, one of my friends said that as she got older, she's a black trans woman, but as she got older, she felt more invisible because of that she'd gained weight and these different issues. And I basically discounted what she had said because, and it sounds stupid, but it's something that I heard on an Eddie Murphy comedy routine where he talked about fat black women and how they're proud of themselves and blah 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 blah. And she called me the fuck out, and I looked at that and I was like, fuck, I'm discounting her feelings that she's told me. She's literally told me that this hurt her feelings, and I was still discounting it. And I'm like, fuck, that's my racist shit. And then part of me was even fighting that. I was like, I was like,
well, that's just the fragility that has a tendency to come out in us sometimes.
well, and I was just like, well, fuck. Well, Eddie Murphy said it. He's black, and then
because if any black person says something about race, then it must be applicably true across the board, right?
Well, but here's the thing. I sat there and I thought about it, and then I was like, oh shit. It was popular not because Eddie Murphy said it. It was because he said it to a white audience.
Yeah.
For him to say it wasn't racist. For me to think it's funny is racist. And to understand the difference in that, it's complex. It's not easy to parse, but white people need to do that and not be so worried about. I mean, I read the other day where people were saying, somebody said, a black person said, white people are more worried about being called a racist than racism itself.
Yeah. What's worse, being called a racist or being the victim of racism?
Yeah,
I
definitely.
And I love what some random put up about reverse racism. Every time I hear a white person say that somebody has been racist towards them, I just want to slap the shit out of them.
Well,
oh my God.
I want to end the show with. It's funny. There's oh God, I want to see if I can find it. There's a guy that
I love how we went right in, how we diverted from talking about our podcast. Oh yeah, I guess it makes sense that we were talking about Tranny Wreck Radio and then would have a conversation about racism.
Well, I to be honest with you, I think that's beautiful. I think it's beautiful that white people need to fucking talk about their own racism and what it looks like. Because I hate to say this, people will bitch in the black community will bitch about people like Tim Wise. Tim Wise is a white person that goes around and talks about basically white racism, and has made a career on it. And there is a lot of animosity within, especially black Twitter, when it comes to Tim Wise. But
what is
Tim
the
Wise is
consensus
white
on there if there is one?
Well, black Twitter essentially thinks that he's basically making a living off the black community, which is true.
Yeah.
But there's a certain racist white people are not going to listen to a black person talk about racism. But
No.
there's a percentage of those people that will listen to a white person talk about their experience and talk about white privilege and racism and kind of break that down. So it is important. It is important. He shouldn't be the person that's talking to that he has a place within white America to speak about race issues, but he shouldn't be the focal point of it. And
Right. Well, and I think, like, honestly, if I made a career out of, and there's other people like Jane Elliott who has done that too, and she does not. Her methods are have drawn quite a bit of controversy, but I think, like, I can understand that though. Like I see both sides of that. Like,
well, I do too.
Yeah,
I think,
but at the same time, white people, and I think we need to take the lead in anti-racist work and dismantling white supremacy.
You should use your own white privilege to dismantle. Yes.
Yeah. You want to hear what my final paper is going to be on in the class that's on this
Sure,
subject?
sure.
So it's a research question that I just came up with is how can I have how can I approach conversations about race or have either an individual or a community-wide conversation about race without white fragility triggering white fragility to the point that it kills the conversation.
Well, Anti-Demon
that's what I'm going to be doing my final paper on.
Anti-Demon in the chat brings up a really good point to that. She said
Yeah.
Tim Wise shouldn't be necessary, but he kind of is.
Yeah.
And that's exactly white people need to have. And to be honest with you, that video that I played of, his name is Jay Smooth, I believe. If you look up Jay Smooth on Twitter and how to talk about race, that is right to the point. When you're talking about doing that kind of work, you need to talk about even when it comes to domestic violence. You need to talk about what was done and what the accusations are, not the person.
Yeah.
Because once it turns into, he was a friend of mine and I know he's a good person, he would never do that. You don't know that. Sorry. You don't know what happens behind closed doors. And so that being said, I think this is a good place to end.
I think I'm full too.
Well, no.
Thank you, buddy.
I definitely would love to have you back at some point, maybe to talk more about this or anything else you wanted to talk about. But I'd love to have you back on.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate the invite, and I'm happy to come back anytime that I have time for it. You caught me at a good time. I'm on spring break right now, but so I'll have to be a little strategic about when I come back. But thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
All right, so that was Rebecca Nay, and thanks everybody for listening. You can find. You can support this channel. I can go to the main screen now. You can support this channel by going to YouTube, hitting the subscribe button, hitting the bell so you know when we go live. If you're on Twitch, subscribe on Twitch or Mixer, Periscope. We're on there as well. You can go to my Twitter account, which is down. Well, actually, it's over there. The opposite of what it feels like. Anti-Demon says Rebecca is very cool. I really love Rebecca. We have a history, and it's a funny history. But she's right. We have grown and learned a lot along the way. People aren't perfect. But if you also, I'm not, when it comes to Patreon, we do have a Patreon. It's Marty Abernathy. So's my Twitter. I feel kind of weird as someone that rails against grifters. But I want to make sure that I can continue to do this. And do it in a way that is good and brings better content and more access. And that's what I'm using any kind of... Anti-Demon in the chat says, what is your YouTube name? If you just go to YouTube and type in Marty Abernathy, it's MartyAbernathy, and I think you already follow me on Twitter. If you just the spelling Marty Abernathy, if you just type that in YouTube, I need to get 100 subscribers, and then I can. Oh, hello! We just got a subscriber. And I can't see that because it's so tiny. Yay. Yeah, some random geek said in the chat, oh, is Daniel Melman subscribed? But yes, if you go to YouTube and you type in Marty Abernathy, if you type in Tea Party, it doesn't come up. But if you type in Marty Abernathy into YouTube, usually the Tea Party comes up. When we get 100 subscribers on YouTube, we're about 80 away from that. But once we get there, we'll get a URL that actually is probably going to be the Tea Party or something along that, Tea Party podcast, something along that. But yeah, support the channel, and because I'm not a grifter, I'm not doing this because I want to be special. I want to be a princess. I want to drink and have my friend Buck Angel come on my podcast. That's not going to happen. But yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to have to get another monitor. Both David and Daniel, my two favorite people in the world that are on Facebook, their name starts with D's. I love you guys. I want to have you out here though. Maybe have you on the podcast. That would be awesome. Anyways, thank you guys for subscribing. If you can basically pass on, share this, that would help too. I just want to keep doing this, and I can only do that by getting more support. Anyways, take care, guys.
We tried